wrote your name so I can't read it, Ann, and I all know that.
Oh, you ought to know it by now.
Just gonna give it to them and give it to the rest.
Ann Benke, 15 Mallard Shores Place, Lexington, 29072. I just want to say that I'm against the entire ordinance, not just this amendment. I am appalled that you feel that it is your job to micromanage the use of private property in this county. If you pass this, I'm wondering who is going to enforce it. Are we going to have to hire more code officers to go around and fine people for not putting enough mulch around their trees? I understand that at the moment that you are at least $750,000 in the hole because of unfunded FCC regulations. And yet, last week you passed an ordinance or you passed spending over $100,000 to buy trees for around these buildings. This week, you're buying an electronics recycling building for over $35,000, and yet we are now $250,000 in a hole. I think that your priorities are skewed here. You need to spend your time figuring out how you are going to save money in this county, how you're going to cut the costs and live within the budget that you have, instead of spending your time, wasting our time dealing with drivel like this. Get off micromanaging private property. Get on to figuring out how we're going to pay the bills in this county and staying within our budget. I know there's talk about raising taxes this year. It's an election year. We're not going to be happy. Things are tough. You're going to have to find a way to come up with the $750,000, and you're going to have to do it by cutting the expenses that we have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sharon, the floor.
Members of council, among the rights that we
First,
citizens.
give us your name and address.
Yes, I'm Sharon, 333 Rutledge Place, Columbia.
Thank you.
Among the rights that we citizens hold dear are property rights. And I'm wondering how you can even consider the seizure of those rights, because that's what this is. If we hold the deed to the property and we pay county taxes, but we cannot feel free to use our property as we should like, then we don't own our property. The county government does. You know, I never thought that I would be speaking to you about this. I mean, this isn't Richland County, you know, folks. This is Lexington County. And I urge you to oppose this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. John Perna.
John Perna. I live at 449 Crockett Road, Columbia, South Carolina. The name Columbia does not mean I'm not in Lexington County. I live in a very small part of Lexington County that has a Columbia address. I'm not an outside agitator. Gentlemen, the word fascism is used incorrectly about 99% of the time. So often that very few people actually know what the actual definition of fascism is. Fascism is government control of private property without outright ownership. The difference between fascism and communism is that in communism, the government admits that they have taken your property, and they say they own the property, and therefore you don't have to pay property taxes on it. In a fascist society, the government takes control over your property, says you still own it, and makes you pay property taxes on it. This piece of legislation is government control of private property without taking the property. This is a piece of fascist legislation. We're being infected with an ideology foreign to our own Constitution, and it comes from an area foreign to our own Constitution, which is called Agenda 21. It's a very small part of Agenda 21. You know, a very small part of our own Declaration of Independence, when our founding fathers wrote down the things that were reasons for us to go to war to keep the king out. They said, he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. And every time you pass a law, that law has to be enforced. The word enforced means you're going to use force against someone in order to bring about whatever your law says. What's the moral justification for the use of force? You have the right to use force against people for the same reasons that people have a right to use force against one another. And that's the protection of life, liberty, and property. You have the right to use force in your own self-defense or the defense of someone else who has authorized you to act in their behalf. The government is the entity that we ask to act in our behalf to defend us, where we would have a moral right to use force to defend ourselves. But you have a right to use force if somebody comes in your yard to cut down your tree. But you don't have a right to use force to go in somebody else's yard and cut down his trees. That this is an extension of the power of government beyond anything that our founding fathers would have imagined. It's not in our Constitution, and it's not justifiable according to our Constitution. Now, I know that the rigors of fighting a case all the way to the Supreme Court to argue a constitutional basis are beyond the resources of most people. But there is another thing that's not beyond our resource, and that's standing here talking to you. And we've got that, of course, the ballot box to reassert what our position on this is. And you take note of the fact that nobody is in favor of government taking over private property. That everybody wants to continue to be a sovereign American citizen who controls his own property. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thomas Lee Kennedy.
I agree.